you so much, praise team. 10 years ago, last month, we moved to our current house from our previous house in Greensboro. And part of that process was made possible. I don't even remember how we found out about this guy, but somebody had told Caroline that this guy had, it turns out it was an old U-Haul truck that kind of scraped the words U-Haul off the side. And so he had kind of a quasi-moving business on the side where he would help people move, big, strong guy. As you talk to him, though, as well, he kind of described himself, as I recall, almost like a general contractor, that he could do some carpentry, plumbing, and electrician as well. So we didn't need that. We just need somebody to help us move. And there were a number of folks from the church who graciously helped us as well, including Tom Bizzaro. And Tom, if you don't know, Tom's a pretty handy guy and knows a thing or two about a whole lot of building, electrical, plumbing stuff. And so he was there helping us that day. One of the last things to move, though, was the washer and the dryer. And so the washer has been placed, and now it's time to place the dryer. And obviously, one of the things that you need to do is it's an electrical dryer, so you need to plug it in. And so this dryer has three prongs on it, and you go and you plug it in. And I don't know who it was that plugged it in, and it was of no fault of their own. But do you remember the Greek god Zeus? With lightning, it was like Zeus all of a sudden appeared, and this gigantic flash of light, and it scared me to death. And there's this huge spark. I was just waiting to see who was going to drop. It didn't look good. Anyway, but it turns out this thing had somehow arced. I don't know, there was some sort of loose connection, and that's 220 volts. And where the wires come into the dryer, it had melted that. And this plug has got scorch marks on it now. And this guy that's helping us move is saying, of course, he's kind of an electrician too. He said, you can just use that. He said, just cut that one prong off. He said, that's a semi-ground. You got your hot and a semi-ground. Just cut that one off. Well, I'm not an electrician, and I know a little bit, maybe enough to get you electrocuted, but I'm hearing that and I'm thinking, I don't think so. But as he's saying this, Tom is standing kind of behind him. And he's like, without trying to say something to embarrass or do anything to this guy, but he's like shaking his head, flipping his eyes back and forth, but don't do that. And I said, I think I'm just going to go to Lowe's and get a new power cord. And once we got a chance to get away from the rest of the crowd, Todd said, I'm really glad he said that there's no such thing as a semi-ground, and you were going to burn your house down. So yeah, don't do that. And so anyway, that experience led me to realize something. If your electrician is talking to you about cutting off the semi-ground, ignore them. In fact, if your electrician is talking about the semi-ground, they're probably not an electrician. But that going forward has been a good teachable moment. If they say this, ignore what they say. It's helpful sometimes when someone is talking about a particular topic to know whether it is you should pay attention to them. So if, for example, your electrician is talking about the semi-ground, ignore them. Get a new electrician. Or beef up your homeowner's insurance. That's a good way to tell that you should ignore them. But what if somebody's given you advice about something else? And the truth is, people give us advice about all sorts of stuff. People give us advice about cooking, about which stores to go, about which restaurants to go to, about what things to order on particular menus, who to go get your hair cut, who to cut your hair, color your hair, whatever, dentists, doctors, all kinds of stuff. People are giving us advice, and they are providing us counsel all the time. And not just sharing with us opinions, or I like this or I like that, but they're seeking to influence us about some of these things, and influence you about a restaurant, or influence you about a particular brand of car, or influence you about something that's maybe of more consequence, like dealing with ideas and politics and that type of thing. But ultimately, it's also true that people are giving you insight and counsel, and they are seeking to affect your thinking, not merely about the restaurants you choose or who it is that you vote for, but beyond that, they are offering counsel about the things that matter most. They're talking about things like worldview. They're talking about things like right and wrong, the basis of truth. They're talking about God. They're talking about the Bible. They're talking about things that don't just have temporary significance. They're talking about things of eternal consequence. If that's the case, and it is, how do you know when you should be paying attention to what that person says? Because people are saying stuff. You'll find it on TV, you'll see it in social media, you'll hear it at school, you'll hear it at the workplace. You're exposed to this. So how do you know when it is that you should actually heed what they're saying, actually pay attention to what they're saying? Well, if you're talking about an electrician and they talk about a semi-ground, ignore them. But if somebody's talking about the stuff that matters most, how do you know if you should pay attention to them? So if someone is seeking to offer to us spiritual guidance, how do I know if I should listen or pay attention to that person? We see the answer to that question as we continue working our way through the 23rd chapter of Matthew. And Jesus, in this series that we're calling Halo, is dealing with some very religious people who look very, very religious. And it seems that if someone who is very religious is offering religious advice or spiritual counsel, don't you think you should pay attention to them? Well, maybe, maybe not. Listen to what Jesus says starting in verse 16 of Matthew 23. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever takes an oath by the temple, it means nothing, but whoever takes an oath by the gold of the temple is bound by his oath. Blind fools. For which is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctified the gold? Also, whoever takes an oath by the altar, it means nothing, but whoever takes an oath by the gift that is on it is bound by his oath. Blind people. Which is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift? Therefore, the one who takes an oath by the altar takes an oath by it and by everything on it. The one who takes an oath by the temple takes an oath by it and him who dwells in it. The one who takes an oath by heaven takes an oath by God's throne and by him who sits on it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You pay a tenth of mint, dill, cumin, and yet have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. These things should have been done without neglecting the other. Blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but you gulp down a camel. Jesus, in talking more about the scribes and Pharisees, he really answers that question for us. How do I know if I should pay attention to someone's spiritual guidance? And based on what he says about the scribes and Pharisees, there's a couple of things that you need to ask. They're kind of litmus test type questions. And the first question is this: do those that are giving you spiritual guidance, do they look for personal exemptions? Do they look for personal exemptions? Now, this entire chapter, Jesus, starting in verse 1 of this chapter, is talking to the crowd, and it could have, or maybe didn't include scribes and Pharisees, but the crowd that he was speaking to knew the scribes and Pharisees. And the Pharisees, again, these were the individuals that the entirety of their lives was affected by their thinking about Old Testament law and about all sorts of rules, and among other things, communicating those rules to others. And even if the Bible didn't give, or the Old Testament had not given a whole set of specific guidelines, they would kind of fill in the gaps. So if there's any question, if there's any detail, they'd make up some rules they would add to the list. Beyond that, you have the scribes. And the scribes, again, these are individuals that have been either apprenticed or they have grown up and by virtue of experience thinking about matters of interpretation of the law, and it also included those whose job was to handwrite the copies of the Word of God. So between these two groups, the scribes and the Pharisees, you've got individuals who are very, very, very familiar with, at this point, what we would know as the Word of God, the left-hand side of your Bible. They knew this stuff in and out. So much of it that they could probably quote vast portions of it, and that they could say, well, this verse says this verse says that. And as they were living their lives, this is not something that they would just think about on the Sabbath day. They were thinking about this stuff on a Monday afternoon and a Thursday morning and a Friday night. They're constantly thinking about these things, especially as they interacted with others. And if you're doing something that might, well, you know, the verse so-and-so says this. Can't believe you're doing that. Shame, shame. Everybody knows your name. I don't know where that came from. Anyway, but They are very, very, very religious people, and they are talking regularly, consistently, and frequently about these spiritual truths, these things actually that matter most. They're talking about right and wrong. They're talking about the stuff that God has actually said. They're talking about things of eternal consequence. They are talking about this, and as such, they're providing direction to people, and Jesus says something to them that's not flattering. Notice what he calls them in verse 16. He has a title for them. He calls them blind guides. Blind guides. In fact, he calls them blind repeatedly in this passage, and near the end of it, he calls them blind guides again. Well, let's say you're going on a campus tour, or you've got a kid that's getting ready to graduate, and you go to a college campus, and Ray Charles shows up to give you the tour. Is there anybody else maybe that could do this? Or if you call for an Uber and Ray shows up, that one in particular, you probably say, I think I'm just going to walk. I'm just going to walk. Because a guide is someone that is giving you direction, providing you direction, and encouraging you to follow them. And Jesus says these are individuals, they are doing that. They're telling people which way to go, and they're saying, hey, follow my lead, but he says they're blind. And if you're a blind guide, it doesn't mean that you're not giving direction. It doesn't mean that you're not suggesting that you know which way to go. You can still do that. The reality is, you just don't know what you're talking about. You're offering direction about something that you haven't seen, saying how to go a place that you've never been to, that you wouldn't know if you even got there. That's what you people are. These scribes and Pharisees, you are so religious. Boy, you can talk about this stuff, but at the end of the day, you're providing guidance, but it's guidance rooted in your own blindness. And he starts to flesh that out, to give evidence of how this is true. And so he says, this is what you do. He says, you take an oath by the temple, and it means nothing, but if you take an oath by the gold of the temple, you're bound. And he gives several examples of this same thought. And it appeals to the reality that every civilization has, and every culture, there are instances where you just need to know if somebody's telling you the truth, right? And so, for example, a place that you really need somebody to be telling you the truth is in a courtroom, right? So if you're going to testify against somebody, if you're going to provide testimony, what's going to happen? Well, they're going to swear you in. And used to always be, but you'd put your hand on a Bible, and then you would raise your right hand, and you would solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. And so the thought is that you are swearing by something solemn, sacred, that's going to kind of help certify and guarantee that what you're saying is actually the truth. Now, that's how it works in a courtroom, but in other instances, you might have somebody swear on someone else's life. I swear on my children's life. I swear on my mother's grave. Or something that is deemed sacred, you swear, you pledge that what you are saying is the truth, and it's secured by your value, the value that you place on that which you're swearing by. This is nothing new. They were doing it then, we're still doing this today, because there are instances where we need to know. It's really consequential that what you're saying is actually the truth. And Jesus says, all right, so you've got these very religious people, and they're offering guidance. And they're telling people, oh, you better do this, you better not do that, you better operate this way. You follow my lead, I know this is how it's supposed to be done. They're doing this, they're offering guidance, they're offering spiritual counsel, but when it comes to the living of their own lives, they are making pledges. They are committing themselves. And they're saying, all right, I'm going to, if you'll loan me $1,000, I swear to you, I'm going to give it back. I promise you. In 3 years, I will pay you back. A little bit each month, I'm going to pay you back that $1,000. Well, how do I know that you're telling me the truth? Well, I swear it by the temple. You'd hear that and you'd say, well, man, this person's religious. I mean, they talk about the law, they talk about the Bible, they can quote Bible verses like crazy, so they're swearing by the temple. So 3 years come up and you say, well, listen, you remember I loaned you that $1,000 and you said you would pay me back. So far, you haven't given me anything. So and Jesus says, these jokers are saying, well, I don't really have to do that. Well, yes, you do. You said you would pay me back. In fact, you swore that you would pay me back. Not only that, you swore by the temple. And these people would say, well, wait a minute. I didn't actually swear by the gold of the temple. So, if you don't swear by the gold of the temple, it doesn't count. It sounds childish, doesn't it? I mean, it's almost like it didn't say Simon Says. So you took this oath, you swore by the temple, the place where God dwells among his people, but that's not sacred enough. And so it only counts if it's the gold of the temple. And then he says, wait a minute, you've got others that are saying, no, I swear by the altar, so the place where sacrifices would be rendered to God. I swear I'm going to do this. I swear that I'm telling the truth. I pledge to you. I commit to you. This is a binding, covenantal relationship. And I swear to you based on the altar of sacrifice. That's a religious person, certainly. They're telling the truth. They're going to keep their word. And then when you seek to confirm that, well, I didn't swear by what was on the altar. So if I'd done that, if I swore by the bull on the altar, then I would be committed. But since I didn't, it doesn't count. Or he talks about swearing by heaven. All of these instances, Jesus is saying, what you guys consistently do is this, that you're wagging your finger and telling everybody else, you need to be doing this and operate by these rules. That you need to operate by these standards, that you need to stay within these guidelines, and that you're saying that this is the best way, this is the appropriate way, this is how it's supposed to work, this is how things really are. But when it comes to you and your own life and the choices that you're making, well, if you cross that line, somehow for you, there's always a loophole. There's an exception somehow always for you. Jesus says that's somebody whose counsel you shouldn't pay attention to. Yes, they may be talking about spiritual things. They may be talking about the things that matter most. They may be talking about the things that are most consequential. However, don't pay attention to them. Because they're saying, hey, this is good for you, but it's just somehow not good enough for them. That they're going to operate effectively based on technicalities. Well, I didn't actually do this because it wasn't sworn by the sacrifice on the altar. I don't actually have to fulfill that obligation. Jesus says, do not pay attention to these people. For years, since coming to Gate City, the honest truth is I have had the easiest job in Vacation Bible School, by far. And I'm glad for that. I really have. And so my job for years has been that I take pictures. And so I go around every day, and I will take hundreds of pictures. And typically every day I generate a slideshow, and then there's whatever at the end of the week to do that. So that's what I do. Well, and hang out at the snack room. But so that's that's my job. Anyway, my least favorite day of Bible school is always Water Day. And I hate Water Day for a variety of reasons. I don't know how this works, but kids show up in clothes, they get them wet, and then they just leave those wet clothes in various places around the church. And you just find old wet, stinky, nasty, dirty clothes in the bathroom or somewhere, and they're like, take this to home. And then there's grass everywhere. There's always grass everywhere because they're tracking wet feet and grass anyway, so that's aggravating. Anyway, but one of the things that happens on Water Day is that they'll play water games. And if you're playing water games, oftentimes one of the things that you will do sometimes is to use water balloons, right? And so you may have kids out there, or if it's the youth, they're doing something, and so they've got some water balloon game. And it's possible that I might be led by the Lord to take one of those water balloons and throw it at one of the poor saps. And so I may do that and hit somebody with the water balloon, hit a teenager, hit a kid with a water balloon, whoever. And then they're like, oh, let's get him. You know what I do? Got the camera. Got the camera. You can't, got the photographer. You can't do that because I have the camera. Jesus says that's what these people are doing. So you can't do it, but they can. So there's this absolute inconsistency. They're offering guidance. They're saying, follow my lead. But at the end of the day, they are consistently those that are looking for personal exemptions. So it's good for you, but it's not good enough for me, because there are loopholes that I am able to walk through. There are technicalities that I'm able to operate in. If there are those that are seeking to provide you that guidance, it's at work, it's at church, it's wherever it is. It could be a family member that's saying, well, you really need to ask yourself, with respect to the living of their life, are they actually practicing what they preach? Are they maintaining the same standard themselves? If not, they may be a guide, but it's not a guide you want to follow. Because blind guides, you don't want to listen to what they say. You better not pay attention to what they're suggesting to do, because you might run into a wall. Do not listen to them. Do they look for personal exemptions? The second thing that Jesus poses here that I think is a litmus test type of question is this: do they pay attention to the clear stuff? Do they pay attention to the clear stuff? I know that doesn't sound especially formal or technical, but it makes sense if you look at this passage. Jesus, in verse 23, he starts again, and you see this throughout this chapter. Woe to you, woe to you, woe to you, woe to you. And he says in verse 23, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. And he's called them blind, but now he uses a word that he's already called them previously, and that's the word hypocrite. We talked about that before. It means a pretender, a play actor. So not only are you blind, again, guys, you're just pretenders. And here he says is the evidence of that. He says, you pay a tenth of mint, dill, and cumin. Well, we'll stop there for a second. It says you pay a tenth. If you're paying a tenth, what are you doing? Well, Jesus is appealing to the fact of this practice established by God back in the Old Testament about a tithe. And so it's based on the reality that everything that a person has, God has given to them 100%, and he asked that you give back to support the advancement, and it was then, and it continues even to this day, that it supports the advancement of the truth about him. All right? So this whole process of tithing, was it a bad thing? No, it wasn't a bad thing. Was it a God thing? Absolutely it was. Was it something that an individual dreamt up? No, it was something that God gave and said this is how it's supposed to operate. Now, it was intended that the tithe would be given based on that which you have received. Our word for it would be income. But keep in mind, though, too, especially back in the Old Testament, but even still in first century times, you're not getting like a paycheck where there's a stub on there that says your FICA wages and net and gross and all that stuff. I mean, you're getting paid sometimes in an amount of precious metal. So, hey, if you will plow these 10 acres, I will give you this much gold or silver. Maybe it is that I will give you this much wheat or some sort of gift in kind. So there's not established formal currencies, certainly throughout the Old Testament, becoming more established by the time you get to the first century. But many times what it is that someone would receive is not just that which would be overtly monetary, but some sort of gift or item in kind. And so the principle was that God had established a tenth of that should go to support the work of ministry, to go to the temple, that it would take care of the Levites, all these things that God had established. So is tithing a bad thing? No, it's not a bad thing. Is Jesus complaining about tithing here? No, he's not. Are the Pharisees and the scribes, are they tithing? Yes. In fact, Jesus says that you guys are tithing from the spice rack. That you're going into your kitchen and you're saying, see, we've got the 16 ounces of dill, so that's 1.6 ounces that need to go to the temple. We were brought in 100 leaves of mint, so 10 of them need to go to the temple. So that you're sitting there counting seeds. You're counting leaves. Now, on the surface, you would think Jesus would be praising them, wouldn't you? I mean, holy cow, these are individuals that they're taking it down all the way to the spice rack. I mean, good night. I mean, that's not just you tithing on your income. That's tithing on the money that you find in the couch. I mean, you just insane detail. And is Jesus praising them? No, he's not praising them. In fact, he says, again, you're pretenders. And you're sitting there counting out mint and dill and cumin. But then he says you've neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. So this whole idea of dealing with justice and treating people justly and fairly, and that there are rights and there are wrongs, and to deal with people based on that and not personal preference or through rose-colored glasses, that people are treated justly. No, I'm so sorry, I can't do that. I'm over here counting dill out because I'm getting ready to make some pickles. The justice thing, I can't. Mercy. And so you're called to demonstrate mercy because the one who is rich in mercy has been merciful to you. So you should be demonstrating and dealing with people mercifully. Yes, justly, but also sometimes the punishment that they warrant for their behavior, that you act mercifully towards them so that you grant them a reprieve just as God in Christ has done that for you. No, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I'm measuring out human. Faithfulness. Faithfulness is talking about the consistency of your walk and consistency of your commitment to God. And so what God expects is that I continue to lean on and lean into Him, and I do so faithfully, consistently. So I'm so sorry, I cannot do that. Can't do that because I've got to measure out making some jellies, and I got some mint, and I need to count out some leaves of mint. So I've got to make sure that I tithe from the spice rack, but I can't operate with justice, I can't operate with mercy, and I can't operate with faithfulness towards God. Really? So you're going to pride yourself and you're going to pat yourself on the back because you're tithing from the spice rack. Did God even talk about that? No, He didn't. He didn't say just anything that you've got around the house, count a tenth of it out. So like you've created this extra layer that you think is commendable for yourself that God didn't even talk about, but the stuff that He has been very clear about, like demonstrating justice and mercy and faithfulness, He did talk about that. And you're like, I can't do this? Jesus says that the person that operates that way, ignore what they say. They're a blind guide. They're someone that's a pretender. They're offering guidance, they're offering spiritual direction, but it's not someone that you should pay attention to because they're over here in the weeds talking about details that God never talked about, but the stuff that He did and was flagrantly clear about, they're completely ignoring that. That doesn't make any sense. That's inconsistent. That's hypocritical. That's pretend. That's someone that you should not pay attention to. For I guess almost a year now, I have been drinking filtered water. And I'm a big fan of a Brita water pitcher. If you don't have one of those, especially in Greensboro, you ought to get one of those because, I don't know if you're aware of this, Greensboro water comes from a gigantic pool, swimming pool. And maybe cesspool, I don't know, but it's some sort of pool. But a lot of times, it just reeks of chlorine. And sometimes, I don't know if it seems like there's times of the year it's worse than others, but you feel like, holy cow, I've just put a straw in somebody's swimming pool. And apart from coffee in the morning, I just drink water all day. And tap water is a lot cheaper than buying bottled water, and so I'd like to drink from the tap, but tap water just doesn't taste good. They had these things on sale at Costco. We got one of these Brita water filters. I'm like, holy cow, this stuff it tastes so much better. And I start reading about this, and it's filtering out, and it's got this carbon fibers and all this stuff that it's doing, and it's filtering out any lead, and it's filtering out some microplastics and chlorine and all kinds of stuff that it's doing. And what I could do is that I could say, man, you need to get this because there's all this stuff that you're drinking, all this stuff that you're ingesting from this treated water that still, it's not good for you. You do not drink that. It needs to be filtered. But here's the thing, I'm not saying that to you. I'm not. Because the same person that's drinking filtered water, this is also true. I was with the kids one day at the McDonald's at the corner of Bridford and Wendover. We were in the kids' play area, and one of them drops a chicken nugget on the floor. I'm not saying that that's premium chicken, but I like McDonald's chicken nuggets. I ate the chicken nugget. Judgmental people. Scribes and Pharisees. Here's the deal. Again, I'm not saying you better be drinking that filtered water because it gets all that stuff out. Because I realize this, I'm the same person that eats nuggets off of the kids' area at McDonald's. But the scribes and Pharisees were the ones that were making their lunch off the floor in the kids' area at McDonald's and then extolling the virtue of filtered water. Jesus says, don't pay attention to that stuff. I mean, that's so clear. You're talking about all this minutia, but these big things that are so clear that there is no question. This is not subject to interpretation. There's not diversity of conviction or opinion about what's the matter? What's the matter? So in terms of application, this leads us to this point. There are those in your life that have occasion and opportunity to speak into your thoughts. And sometimes this occurs in the cafeteria at school or in the break room at work or over the fence in the backyard or it's at the dinner table at Thanksgiving, whatever it is. There are people that are speaking into your life, that are speaking into your circumstance. And some of them are talking about things that don't matter. They're talking about lawnmower brands and they are talking about particular restaurants. But beyond these things, they're also talking about things that are of real consequence. They're talking about the things that matter most. And they're talking about God. They're talking about biblical truth. They're talking about worldview. They're talking about these things that really genuinely matter. As you hear that, you need to ask yourself, should I actually pay attention to what this person is saying? And the question is not, do they go to church? Are they religious? Do they have familiarity with the Scriptures? Because the scribes and Pharisees, they had all of that. But Jesus says, you're providing guidance, but you're blind guides. There are blind guides in your life that you need to say, that's what they are, and I'm not going to heed that counsel. But the other layer of application is this. You are the guide to somebody. And I'm not saying that you're on a platform standing with an open Bible at school or at work or in the neighborhood, but you're having these conversations, some of you with a lot of people, some of you with a few people. But you are speaking out and you're speaking to these particular issues about the stuff that really matters. And you are that person that somebody says, oh, well, they're religious. They're talking about the Bible. They have a Bible. They go to church. Should they pay attention to you? Should they listen to what you say? Let me ask you this. Are you one that the rules are good for them, but not for you? Are you the one that focuses on the minutia, the stuff that God hasn't even talked about, while ignoring the stuff that He has been flagrantly clear about? Is it possible you not only have blind guides in your life, maybe you are a blind guide? Understand this. It doesn't have to stay that way. It shouldn't stay that way. Will you bow your heads with me?